Hi everyone, Scorp here. So somebody wanted me to do a tier list of all of the types of creatures in the game. Um, so I figured I'd rank them from what I think is like the best deck archetype to the worst deck archetype. I am missing a couple deck archetypes on here. Control, burn, that kind of stuff isn't going to necessarily be represented here. And I'm also going to assume that Riryoku's banned and trying to go for a deck that's about 1200 deck cost. So that's my criteria for like those are my conditions under which I'm going to rate these cards. Because if you allow Riryoku to be legal, then your burn deck is just like it's your best deck, and then you have to have like 2 or 3 tiers before your next deck because there's nothing that's ever going to beat it. So yeah, going with that. Starting off here with water, I'm actually going to put water as good. Water is very good at working with other archetypes. You're not going to really play pure water, but you have some really, really, really strong tools for making more aqua terrain. Not just Umi, but you have Violent Rain, you have Furious Sea King, you have Roaring Ocean Snake. You have a decent number of equips, and on top of that, aquas are usually splashed together with the other with fish and sea serpents, so that you can use them to make better creatures. You can go into Aqua Dragon quite easily with them. Unfortunately, that makes them you're not really just going to play pure water, but you're going to put waters in your other decks that are using the uh, sea serpents and stuff to make good cards. So you kind of just have to have waters around in those decks. So honestly, I think that makes it better than just any of the other ones of those pure water archetypes. Next up, I'm going to put Beast Warriors. Um, they're between average and good. They are very close to good. I mean, I'll put them at the very bottom of good at the end of this, because they have two archetypes you can play as. One of them is Neko Gals. Neko Gals is kind of it's kind of sacky. It's a lot better in vanilla. I'm also doing this from a Gemini perspective or Redux, but preferably from Gemini because I did a little bit more rebalancing of deck costs for creatures on some of the later archetypes. But Beast Warriors are you can very easily put in like 12 equips and 12 level 4 to 6 creatures, and then you have -2 summoning power from your leader. You can also put in 3 Sendyendens, and you can quite easily play like 4,000 attack beat sticks every single turn because you're just putting 4 equips on every creature that you play, and your deck doesn't brick because you're not relying on fusions. That's the other way to play from the Neko Gals. Neko Gals, you play 999, 9 females, 9 beasts, and 9 equips. It's what Taya has, except she doesn't have nearly enough equips. And it's something you could put together very easily. You don't even have to have Beast Warrior as your leader, although you should, just from because the Beast Warrior leader powers are really, really strong. That's why it's in good tier. Next up is Beasts. If this were anything but Gemini, I'd put these things in like below average or awful. But because they have like a trillion leader powers that are really strong, you guys probably saw them in my last video, and they have good equips with Mystical Moon and Beast Fangs. You can really power them up quite quickly. Um, there are 3 fusions for Super Warlion I put in for Gemini. Um, they are quite good. They are quite fast, and honestly, I could honestly make a case for them to actually be up here. Um, I know I haven't done a playthrough with them yet, but beasts are quite strong. So I'm gonna leave them there as good. Um, and you guys can just trust me that they're in a pretty good spot. Dinosaurs, they're just going in awful. I there's I mean, I guess I should probably put them in below average, but I mean, there has to be a worst. And no matter how much I try to make their leader power stronger, they're just awful. I There's nothing to say about it. They're just terrible. It is a testament that their best fusions are a reptile and a rock, and their best deck for playing dinosaurs is that you don't play a single dinosaur in your deck. You just fuse into them, and even then, like they're still bad. So I mean that's the problem. And then on top of that, if you play against a rock opponent, you just instantly lose the game. So that's even worse. That's an even better reason to use these two as your fusion materials, so that you can actually do some semblance of something about that. Yeah, it's not great. Okay, next up, something that's really strong. We can just put dragons in best, can't we? Um, Dragons have amazing leader powers. Dark dragons are and fire dragons. Just you can play MBDs like they're going out of style. You can also play um, you can easily go into dark dragons and go into beast skulls and all of the red eyes fusions super easily. Trihorn super easy to get to in Gemini. Same with Redux, even just super strong. You can play unbelievably aggressively with dragons. The -2 summoning power is amazing. And they also enable the twin-headed thunder dragon deck with them as a deck leader. It's absolutely silly. Um, so yes, dragons definitely can go up there in best. Fairies are going in good. Um, Fairies, if they didn't have their leader powers, they'd be in below average. But their leader powers are absolutely insane. Um, if you end up playing against zombies or fiends, you just instantly win the game, and that's invaluable. They have increased resistance for same type friendlies, extended support range, increased strength. You name it, they have it. It's great. And you can, of course, play this with Mystical Elf and go full light strategy using Happy Livers and Ray and Temperature. By about turn 5, you're pretty much invincible, except for to Joraigamo. So yeah, fairies are super strong, and they have great synergies with one of the best cards in the game is Mystical Elf. So I can't say anything bad about them. Fiends, they're average. This is like fiends are the most average thing that you can actually play. They are the thing that I would compare everything else to in terms of what an average strength deck would be. I did buff them so that they could actually compete in the matchup against. They need to actually compete against spellcasters, and because of how strong the Cosmo Queen fusion is in Gemini, I had to buff them and give them increased movement for same type friendlies on their leader power. Um, it it does make fiends quite strong, but I honestly think they're just straight up average compared to all of the things in good. Next up is fish. Fish is going in average. Um, you have only Fortress Whale. You can play them standalone. Usually they're just getting splashed into your other deck to make sea serpents. They're getting fused off with dragons. Dragons are one of the best fusion creatures. You're going to fuse fish with them, make Karyushin, and play your Karyushin strategy where Karyushin makes the water field for you and you play your equips on Karyushin. Or you use Karyushin to go into your next fusion. So fish are usually, you're just going to play 3 white dolphins in your deck or something. Mako's deck is pretty much pure fish, and it's pretty good, honestly. The fact that they fuse with fairies and you can put in some really fun fairies into your fish deck is pretty nice. But I think they're honestly pretty mediocre. Um, Next up, Immortals. Yeah, they're pretty below average. Um, they're especially with me restricting this to 1200 deck cost. Immortals are extremely expensive. Um, Other than the ones that you're just going to splash in every single deck. And of course, I nerfed Jowls of Dark Demise to no end because that thing for 18 deck cost was absolutely stupid. Um, it's still broken at 50 deck cost, but I mean, besides that, there's not really Immortals I want to put in my deck. Um, if I'm building an Immortal deck, I'm going to have my 3 Slate Warriors, probably going to have Rigor Sleevers, and I'm going to have Jowls, but there's not a single other card I really want to play. Um, you've got your big beat sticks and Moisture Creature and Carrot Idol, but the problem is that once you've already put those other 9 Immortals in your deck, I mean, you're looking at like 500 deck cost you've already wasted. I mean, it's really hard to actually play Immortals because they just cost too much. And then on top of that, it's hard to splash them into another archetype besides Jowls, because Jowls is super broken. Because then you just create Crush Terrain, and Crush Terrain is usually not good for any other archetype. Not to mention, they're super annoying to get, and um, obtaining a deck with them is kind of annoyingly hard, surprisingly. So this is why I like to see Immortals as like below average. I mean, if you have an entire collection of them and you can somehow put together a deck that doesn't break the deck cost requirements of whatever you're playing, they can be pretty strong. But they're not like Jowls is like the only card that's like it's just so broken. And then you could put like Mucus Yolk in like a burn, some weird burn deck. I've done that a lot. It's kind of okay, but I think you're just gonna get run over by like almost anything above it on this list. Is just gonna pull out like an 8,000 attack beat stick and just blow you away. I know Fairies is gonna do that. Water is just gonna remove all of your crush terrain and then kill you. Fish is gonna do the same. Fiends are just gonna kill you in like 3 turns. Beast warriors are definitely going to kill you in 3 turns, and dragons are going to have killed you in 2. So yeah, that's the problem with immortals. Is also you're going to have problems with summoning power because you have their leader powers aren't great, and on top of that, they can never get -2 summoning power for creatures. And your moisture creatures what like 9 summoning power, which is just so much. So that's enough on Immortals. I don't like them. So they're going in below average for me. No surprise to anyone that's watching my videos. Insects tier 1. Um, it's probably like close between insects and dragons on which is actually the strongest. Because of all of the nerfs I gave to insects. But you can still play 3 Pupa of Moths. At 1200 deck cost, you could easily play 3 Pupas. You can put the Monster Reborns in your deck, so once your Pupas are used, you can literally just Monster Reborn them back and then use them again, and bring out 5 perfectly ultimate great moths really quickly, which is absolutely silly. Um, so, I mean, you can play a 2-star 3500 beat stick. It's pretty good. You have Maneater Bug, which is one of the best removal options in the game. You have Jiraigamo, which is you put 2 equips on it, and it's literally invincible. It can never lose in battle, and it's going to do a ton of damage to your opponent. The life point for moving basically just tells your opponent how screwed they are. It's great. And nobody can really play around the card. And its downside is basically it's just cost an extra 5 deck cost. Is really its only downside. And then on top of that, if you want to be cheeky, you have Dungeon Worm, which is just silly if you're playing on a bunch of labyrinth terrain. And you can go for some fun lethals. Oh, and then on top of that, you have this card called Oceanal Bug, which, even after nerfing it to 80 deck cost and uh, putting it to 7 stars, the card is still good enough to just see play in plant decks and beast decks and beast warrior decks and any deck that you just want to play a forest card and you don't have one. Um, it's a forest on a stick, except in insects, it's a 40 to 500 attack beat stick. Almost always. So, I mean, for 7 stars, I can play out a card that's as strong as a blue as Ultimate Dragon. It's wonderful. Um, so yeah, I mean, insects just absolutely insane. And then you can splash in a couple warriors or whatever so that you don't have to deal with, or so that if your opponent plays eradicating aerosol or something, you can just avoid it. Um, yeah, they're absolutely ridiculous. Next up, machines. Um, Machines are a hard one. If Barrel Dragon weren't, um, if Barrel Dragon chose to not just grief you every single time, they would be in good. They'd be at the top of good. But Barrel Dragon just griefs you really, really bad. Um, and if they had any other beat sticks that were, 6 stars that were actually good, like a Jinzo or something, I would put them in good also. But unfortunately, your best beat stick is a Metal Zoa, and I don't really want to play a beat stick for 6 stars. They have a distinct lack of a mid range that doesn't just have terrible stats, um, which is just a shame. That's my problem with machines. I always have issues with them. Definitely a This is definitely a mess for me to say. Um, this is like I'm pretty sure some people are going to be mad that I'm putting machines as average. They are quite strong, and they play quite aggressively. But I'm sure that the Aqua on the list above it's going to beat them. The two and best are absolutely going to dismantle them. And I think they probably lose to these three most of the time. So yeah, I think they go down here. It's hard to really put machines much higher with Barrel Dragon just constantly griefing you, and that being basically your best play. Ooh, plants. I'm putting them in average. At 1200 deck cost, they are pretty weak because it's hard to actually play plants that cost that much. Um, and plants are great for their fusions. They go well in zombies. They go well with fiends to make rose specters. Um, if we were doing a tier list at like 800 deck cost, these things would be pretty close to best. But unfortunately, at 1200 deck cost, I mean, you can just play better things. But they're still not bad. I mean, they have good leader powers. They have good fusions. They have a bunch of ability to go with equips. They have Laughing Flower, Maneater. You have some tricks you can do to destroy a bunch of enemy cards. They're pretty decent. Definitely not something I'd sleep on, but plants are pretty good. Could be better, definitely, but could also be worse. Okay, pyros. Um, so pyros are basically in the same place as plants. If you end up hitting good leader powers against opponents, or if you have a good leader power matchup against your opponents, you kind of just win. Because if your opponent plays plants against you, they just all die. If they play beasts against you, they just all die. Um, it's pretty one-sided. They have basically the best set of leader powers in the game, by a very large margin. Um, and on top of that, they have access to some pretty good fusions. For 3 stars, they can go into basically their boss monster, Flame Cerberus. I think their biggest problem is they don't actually have the strongest top end. and they don't have the ability to move two spaces at once. I mean, honestly, I could probably put them in good, and put them right below Beast Warriors, just because of their leader powers. I mean, they're right on the edge of average and good. They're definitely not in best tier, and they're definitely not below average. They're pretty solid. Um, I don't know if they'd actually beat machines that often though. It's really tough on them. But if we have too much stuff in good, we can move them down at the end. Reptiles are going in awful. I should give them a little more credit, but they have one card and it's called Serpentine Princess, and otherwise they're awful. Um, and if you play a single magical neutralizing force field, or you play a Jiraiya, or you play a Ray and Temperature, or a Happy Lover, guess what? So, reptiles are terrible. They're fusion materials for fiends as well as dinos, and that's pretty much the end of their existence. They don't get buffed by any fields, which is even worse. So yeah, they're going in awful. It's a shame, but that's where they're going. Rocks are going at the top of good. Um, you have you can play rocks like I just did, where you go into the mystical sands, and that's pretty strong. You have immunity to all traps and all that stuff, which is just amazing. You can play through the game without having to really think too much because you basically aren't going to have a problem. Anything that would usually be an issue is just negated by your leader powers, and you have pretty solid leader powers. Also, you just destroyed dinosaurs because why not? Just gotta pile onto hating an awful class already. So yeah, rocks are quite good. And then you actually have another deck archetype you can play, which is the Ancient Jar archetype, which is playing straight control. You play Ancient Jar and you play a bunch of traps and Invitation to a Dark Sleep, Swords of Revealing Light. And you hope your opponent doesn't have a leader power that says, um, all of my creatures are immune to traps. Even still, with invitations and some other cards, some other monster effects like that, you can probably still win the game. The problem is you don't really have a win condition. But do you really need a win condition when your opponent can't play the game? I believe your win condition in that deck is your opponent throws the controller through their screen, um, and they rage quit, and it's kind of beautiful. So yeah, rocks are pretty good. Almost entirely carried by their leader powers. Now sea serpents. These are the problem with sea serpents is there's like five of them in the entire game. There's Karyushin, Aqua Dragon, Takrimos, Spike Seadra. Is that all four? I think it might be four. Oh no, there's Sea King Dragon. Yeah, that's five. Yeah. If there were more than five of these things, they'd be great. Um, sea serpents are what you fuse into with your water, your dragons, and your fish. And you end up with a good creature that changes the field for you and does a great job. You can quite easily you can even play this as like a sea serpent into twin-headed thunder dragon deck because of how things work, how fusions go. I mean, you can do a lot with sea serpents. They're great. The problem is like there's only four of them, so it's hard for me to rate an archetype that there's four of. So in this case, they're just kind of average because they're what you're going to go into from these, and they end up in that same deck. So I think they're all average to good. Oh, hey, spellcasters, they're average. With the Cosmo Queen fusion, they're slightly above, better than they used to be, but fix that real quick. Sorry. Yeah. They're literally right on par with fiends. Um, They probably beat Fiends in a one-on-one matchup because of Cosmo Queen and its good fusions. Um, but then you realize that Fiends probably beat everything else in good, or beat other things better than them because I gave them a better leader power now. But they're both super strong, but they're both exactly average. I mean, it has the most average leader powers you can possibly get. Um, you can play out your Cosmic Queen super easily. I would definitely play a Cosmic Queen deck over a Dark Magician deck. Dark Magician decks are just not good um, in comparison to Cosmic Queen decks. And I mean, there's just, I mean, and then you also have the Mystical Elf deck. So you can play the Light Spellcaster deck, which is also a super strong option, and almost puts it in good. So, but I already have that version in with fairies, which is just better in good. So I'll leave it here at the top of average. But if you ask me what the average strength of a deck is, I would have told you it was spellcasters. And I think it and fiends are about in the same exact spot, so it's a good place for it. Thunders are going in best. Twin-headed thunder dragons just diabolical. The fact you can fuse it out for 3 summoning power with a dragon deck leader is disgusting. And you can kill your opponents in about 2 turns. Ishizu does not do it justice whatsoever. But yeah, Thunders, they're good. Please don't sleep on Thunders. They're good. Warriors, can I just put them in awful? Well, if this was the base game, they'd go in awful. They're going in below average in Gemini. And they're going below average because I nerfed Green Cap and Eye Armor into the dirt. You basically have a couple good options for cards you can play. You have Swordsman from a Foreign Land, Green Kappas, Eye Armors. These are cards that are good in any deck, which is great. The problem is Warriors don't have good fusions. Your best bet is to go into Judgeman or Blackluster Soldier or one of the other ritual fusions. But the problem is their leader powers aren't amazing. In the base game, they were atrocious. Really, Warriors they're just outclassed by everything else, and it's really a problem. And the best thing about them is that you just put like your Eye Armors and Green Kappas and Swordsman from a Foreign Land and Dream Clowns or whatever those cards that you ended up managing to get, you just throw them in any deck and they're good. But honestly, they're better in those decks than they were in Warriors, because the reason you splashed those cards into your deck is so that when your opponent came to you and you're playing Beast, right? And your opponent just walks in and says, haha, I'm playing Pyros, you can't do anything about it. Now you can just play down an Eye Armor and lethal them, and their leader power doesn't do anything to you. That's the reason you play Warriors, and it's not to play your own deck. They're in the same spot as Immortals, as I just want to splash a couple of the good ones into my deck, and then there's a group of like 60 cards that probably should just not exist in this game, because there's a whole bunch of them that I just don't want to ever play. If I see them, they're the first thing that gets cut out of my deck. And that's kind of a shame, but that's where they are. Winged Beasts, they're probably about average. They're super aggressive. They're pretty strong. You can definitely play a Crimson Sunbird Turbo. You can play Spirit of the Books Turbo pretty well. I think they kind of just get run over by the stuff that's stronger than them. You could definitely make a case that they're good. I mean, honestly, they're probably about the same power level as your spellcasters. So, I know I wouldn't call them quite good, but they are pretty solid. They're going to get you through the game quite well, and you're going to do it quite quickly. in a 1v1, they're going to get just stomped by the best decks. Um, but they could definitely take games off of any of the average. Actually, they're going in good. They could definitely take a game off of any of these decks. They can. Well, they're going to probably win most of their games against these decks. Um, and they're going to take games off of these decks. Definitely these three here are pretty close to average, but I mean, I'm splitting hairs between good and average most of this. Um, the awful deserves to be there, the best deserves to be there. The below average deserves to be where it is. These are all like everything but spellcasters and fiends can kind of, this is all pretty close to each other. Zombies are going below average. Um, and why might I say that they're going in below average? Well, you see, their best thing is that they can play Pumpkin and scale infinitely. Well, guess what spellcasters can do? They can scale infinitely. Guess what the rest of these can do? They can kill your opponent before zombies really get online. And that's the problem with zombies. They just don't get online in time. And then there's this thing called fairies, which just completely destroy them. Um, yeah, I have never really said zombies are amazing, and this is coming from a person that plays zombies way too much as a kid. Um, but zombies are by far one of the weaker attributes because of how fast I think the game would be, especially at 1200 deck cost. You can play a deck so much faster than zombies can actually keep up with. One of the greatest strengths of zombies is their you can play like a 500 deck cost deck super easily with them, and they do amazingly well at 500 deck cost. They also have Fiend's Hand and Snake Hair, which are great cards for removal options. Um, but most of the time, you're just going to splash those in your other decks and move on with your life. So, yeah, zombies are kind of below average. Yes, they have the potential to be gigantic beatsticks. Their main issue, I think, is that they only have Violet Crystal as their main equip. The other one is Dark Energy, which is less than an equip. In my mind, I don't like 300-point equips. So yeah, that's my tier list. Really three really good things and a couple really bad ones down at the bottom. But overall, I mean, most of the things in the middle here are quite balanced. Zombies could maybe use a little love to get them out of this, but I think they deserve their status there because it's hard to actually make them better without making them broken. So yeah, let me know what you think. Thank you all for watching and have a nice day.